All right, so welcome to the Knowledge Transfer Lunch and Learn. Thank you all for being here. My name is April English. I am the Knowledge Transfer Officer with the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Knowledge Transfer Unit, which is also called MEC2 at the New Brunswick Institute for Research, Data, and Training within the University of New Brunswick. So I'm very excited for everyone to be here and the overwhelming response that we've had, so thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into it. I first would like to respectfully acknowledge that UNB stands on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional Wolastoq Way land. The lands of Wabanaki people are recognized in a series of peace and friendship treaties to establish an ongoing relationship of peace, friendship, and mutual respect between equal nations. The river that runs by our university is known as Wolastoq, along which live Wolastoqui, the people of the beautiful and bountiful river. Wolastoq is also called the St. John River. So today, throughout this Lunch and Learn, I do encourage everyone to interact with each other using the chat function. There's a couple of quizzes and games, so we'll go over those and feel comfortable talking in the chat if you are okay doing so. So to get things going in the chat box, I'd first like to know who we have in the audience today. So you can put in the chat box how you categorize yourself. So maybe you're a policymaker or a researcher, maybe you're an evaluator or a KT individual yourself. And I'll just give a few moments for that. Great, and so I see that we have a few policymakers, a few knowledge transfer people themselves, and also a few evaluators. So that's great. Thank you everyone for coming. And the reason I'm asking for that today is just so I can understand who my target audience is, and they're also called knowledge users, which you'll find throughout the Lunch and Learn that I use more and more. And I want to know who my knowledge users are for the next 40 minutes with this Lunch and Learn, and hopefully I can cater some examples to this group in particular. On that topic, I do want to acknowledge a couple of my own unconscious biases before we get started as well. So recently I completed the Knowledge Translation Professional Certification with the Hospital for Sick Children. They offer a suite of resources, workshops, and certification programs in the knowledge translation field. So a lot of my professional knowledge comes from that course, and today we will be using the template from Sick Kids to go through the planning process. There are a lot of other resources available out there, and I will touch on a few other ones at the end as well. Also note that my background is in public health, so my personal experiences and background come from the lens of health and equity. However, please do note that any of the resources and examples I show you today, they can be geared towards any field, including things like agriculture or social sciences. And I also wanted to just mention that the Canadian Institute of Health Research, they have some great information about Aboriginal specific KT or knowledge transfer. And that's to help understand and respect the distinct needs of Aboriginal communities in research and build on traditional practices and understandings of knowledge generation and sharing. And if you want to know more information about Aboriginal specific KT, that can be found on the Canadian Institute of Health Research website. Again, I'm coming from my background, but I am excited to learn more and more about Aboriginal specific knowledge transfer and bring that to my own work as well. And I encourage everyone to look into that more and more. So whether you're a researcher or an educator or a policymaker, whatever field you're in, this Lunch and Learn, will help you. So this is designed to help you understand knowledge transfer and appreciate the relevance of knowledge transfer in your own context. Understand what knowledge transfer means, describe the value of it, describe some planning processes, and find and access KT resources. So let's hop into it. So what comes to your mind when you think of the word knowledge transfer or knowledge translation? What are some words that come to your mind? What feelings first pop in your mind? Some thoughts, maybe some past experiences. I'll get everyone to type that in the chat box. Great. So some people do know what knowledge transfer is, or they've heard it maybe in the past, I'm seeing. Perfect. And another reason I'm asking about this is Knowledge transfer is kind of one of those words that might be passed around in meetings, maybe one of those jargon words that not everyone 100% know what it means. They might think, yeah, we need to do a lot more knowledge transfer, but then you come to realize that your whole team doesn't know what knowledge transfer is, or you don't know how to plan for knowledge transfer, or maybe you've never done it at all before. So this video I recommend watching. It will be in the description box if you want to take a look. Rena Narens, hopefully I pronounced that right, from the Kundal Center for Child and Youth Depression and the Margaret and Wallace McCain Center for Child, Youth, and Family Mental Health. She does a spoken word poem on what knowledge translation is, and I think it's a really good overview of what knowledge translation is, or knowledge transfer, what challenges we may face, and things like that. So I really do recommend taking a peek at that video. And when you do watch that video, you can pause this video here, come back to it, and then think again, what comes to your mind when you think of the word knowledge transfer? Do you have different words that pop into your head, different feelings? Maybe it's a little bit clearer for you. Just take a moment to think about that as well. You might also notice that I've been using the word knowledge transfer, knowledge translation simultaneously. And that's true. And something that just keeping in mind is that some organizations use knowledge exchange, or knowledge translation, or knowledge transfer. They might use knowledge brokering. They might just skip right to dissemination. And the word people use is not important. All you need to know is that sometimes these words are used synonymously, and it's important to just understand what we mean behind these words. And so what we're going through today, some organizations might use a different word, and that's okay. In fact, in Canada, we're one of the only countries who uses the word knowledge translation. In the US, for example, they just skip right to it and they call it dissemination, and that's heavily what we're looking at today. So don't get confused. It's not all that important. It's just important if you understand the process behind it and how to do KT effectively. And so what challenges do you think are some of the challenges in KT? Or sorry, what do you think are some of the challenges to KT? So A, we think publication is the road to change. B, researchers don't usually consider knowledge needs of their audiences. C, we think practice change magically just happens. Or D, all of the above. And I'll give you a second to think about your answer. Great, so it is D. So A, we sometimes think that publication is the only way to go and that it's going to change everything. B, sometimes people think that we're not really thinking about who our target audience is, or maybe just doing the publication because that's part of the academic process. And then we don't think about who's going to read it at the end. And C as well, we think practice change just happens. So it just magically, there's a program that is implemented because of research, or there's a policy change. So just to get into it, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, again, today we're talking largely about dissemination when we think of the word knowledge translation. And dissemination is an umbrella term that involves processes and strategies that ensure knowledge is understandable, accessible, and can benefit a range of audiences. It is important to realize that sometimes knowledge translation does also involve implementation. However, implementation can involve a whole suite of their own lunch and learn. And so today we're focusing on what we can do today in our work, and looking at dissemination specific as well, because it's kind of that first step before we get to the implementation. And so why should we care about knowledge translation? What's the value behind it? Why shouldn't we just publish our research and be done with it, and expect policymakers to pick it up, the research, and drive the change behind that? And so knowledge emerging from research is valuable to knowledge users outside of just academia. And research is meant to be shared with those who can benefit from it. And those who can benefit from it might be people like policymakers or those who are looking at implementing a program into their community, things like that. And if you think about maybe policymakers or a person, let's say in a not-for-profit, who's maybe looking at picking up a program that this research focused on, they're not going to pick up a published research paper and read through it and make a program out of that. They want it to be in a little bit more layman's terminology, or maybe they want a different way to access the information. And so that's just something to think about and why we should care about knowledge translation. If you're not convinced yet, in the health field, it's been said that failing to use available knowledge or science is costly and harmful. It leads to overuse of unhelpful care, underuse of effective care, and errors in execution. And this is true of other sectors as well, including the education sector, social sciences, and agriculture. And so KT provides the means to share this research knowledge, raise awareness, and when appropriate, maybe influence behavior or change practice or inform policy decisions like I was talking about before. So what does KT involve exactly? And I've already touched on it. It's about the dissemination largely is the first step, and sometimes it also involves that implementation step, which is the actual application of the knowledge. And again, oftentimes when we're talking about implementation, it involves its own suite of processes. You might bring in an implementation scientist or things like that. Awesome. So now to look at the benefits of knowledge translation. And I might be starting to convince some of you, but you want to know what the benefits are. And so sharing knowledge by practicing effective knowledge translation can improve understanding, enhance practice, inform decision making, and improve policies. And this is because KT is about making sure people understand the evidence and then that they can use it in a way that benefits them. And if you're a researcher, KT is particularly important for you because engaging in KT can help you secure funding and it can help facilitate academic and professional growth. Around the world, increasingly funders are requiring researchers to plan for KT, demonstrate the impact of the research or the benefits of your research, and how your research will advance science or practice or policy or well-being. So essentially asking, how will your research make the world a better place? And so now, given the value and benefits of KT, your next task is to think about how you can translate and apply your research evidence. And so what you see on the screen here, if you don't plan for it, it won't happen. And the same can be said for KT. If you don't plan for KT, it won't happen. So without a KT plan, your KT activities will likely be disorganized and have little direction. And so let's hop into what actually makes a good KT plan and what tools you can use to create a KT plan. And so today, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be using a template from Sick Kids, and this is free to download online as well. If you just search the little resource I have on the right here, Knowledge Translation Planning Template, the Hospital for Sick Children, something along those lines, it'll pop up on Google and you can download it for free. And so a KT plan is based on a set of key components, and to help you identify the components, this template is designed to help guide you in the planning process in a step-by-step manner. And it's also applicable for a diverse range of sectors. Taking the time to properly plan for KT for a project or for your research will help ensure your research evidence gets to the right people at the right time and in formats they can understand and benefit from. And so the goal is to develop a KT plan that is appropriate for your research or the research you're looking at, your knowledge users, and your unique KT goals. And this means that all of the KT plans, everyone's will be different. And as we're going through the template today, I want you to think about one piece of research evidence you or your team might be looking at right now, and just think about some of the answers behind each of the components. So first up on the very left here, Number one, we have who are our project partners? So before the project even begins, consider which partnerships will ensure the success of your research evidence. And so you'll notice I said before your project even begins. So it's best to look at this template at the very, very beginning. Even if, let's say you're a researcher and you're considering doing some research, it is really helpful to start looking at this sooner rather than later. And so again, you want to identify who impacts your work, who will be impacted by your work, and there are some examples on the screen here, such as other researchers, the public or media, decision makers, etc. And if you're approaching this as a researcher, you may be used to identifying your co-investigators and collaborators, which is okay. You want to think about what partnerships can help achieve your research goals as well. And maybe beyond researchers or academics, who else would be an asset in your research? Again, consider relationships that will advance your project. Step 2 is looking at your level of partner engagement. So think about when you'll actually engage those partners. Different partners may be engaged at different points in the process. Some will be collaborators, while some will be end users. And depending on your KT goals, your project activities may involve a little or a lot of collaboration. And I touched on this already, but best practice is to engage at the beginning and throughout your project. And again, because the earlier you engage your project partners, including knowledge users or your target audience, which I'll touch on in a bit, the better. When you give your partners a voice, they can benefit from your experience. People want to feel involved in the process of discovery and interpretation, and when engaged early on, they're more receptive to research findings. Step 3 is looking at partner role. So while partnerships can enhance your KT activities, it's vital that everyone understands their role within your project team. Your plan needs to define each of the partners' role in the project and your expectations of their role and responsibilities. So what do you want each partner to bring to the table? What are your expectations of your partner's role and their involvement? And what are their expectations? Best practice here is to consider creating a memorandum of understanding or a project charter to define, clarify, confirm you and your partner's roles and responsibilities, and just make sure everything's clear. Number 4 on the very right is expertise requirements. So identify what expertise may be needed on your project team if it's appropriate. So consider the needs and breadth of KT activities. And shown on this template, expertise might involve KT supports maybe already in your organization, or there might be KT supports that exist in other partner organizations that you can pull upon, or maybe you might need to hire someone if it's feasible. Going into step 5, knowledge users, which can also be called target audience, but for KT, we typically call it a knowledge user. So knowing what you want to say and why requires knowing who you want to reach. And so step 5 asks you to consider who you want to reach. So in other words, think about who needs to know what you've learned, who's going to be interested in your research findings, who will value this research knowledge. So for example, if your research has looked specifically at, evaluating policies or looking at gaps in policies in the province, well, then you are probably likely going to target it at policymakers as one example to show them the gaps and here's what we want to change, et cetera, et cetera. Keep in mind that knowledge users can and likely will overlap with your project team and your project partners. And best practice is to actually include knowledge users on your research or project team. Funders sometimes ask that you work with knowledge users as well in the planning and development of grant proposal. And we call this integrated KT. And involving knowledge users on your team early on can improve the relevance of your research questions, methods, interpretations, etc. I think we've touched on that already a little bit. But again, if you're able to do that integrated KT and having your knowledge users and your partners involved from the very beginning to help shape research questions, then that's fantastic. But it's not always possible or feasible. So you want to be clear on how you will engage your knowledge users as well and what role they'll play in your research and in your KT plan. So these are just all things you want to think about. In the middle there, step 6 is identifying your main message. These address what you learned or what you anticipate learning. And a well-written main message is a clear, concise, and audience-focused statement. Think about it in terms of SMIT or single most important thing. So here's what I've learned, and when appropriate, your BLAM or your bottom line actionable message, basing recommendations on the information you've learned maybe. Best practice, you should develop these from the perspective of the knowledge user, your target audience, who your research is intended for, and frame your findings to address their needs. And again, if you have your knowledge users engaged throughout, this will make this easier to do. And also note that you'll likely have different main messages for each knowledge user group. Also really important to use plain language. So focus on plain language communication, which is meaning using short sentences, use an active voice, emphasize positive, and limit your use of jargon or acronyms. And if you attend my KT workshop in February 2022, I will go in a little bit more detail about some tools that can help you with plain language writing and some examples of what I mean behind limit your use of jargon, et cetera, et cetera. Some questions you might want to consider for your main message as well is, what would the research results mean for my knowledge user? Why would it be important to this group? What information from the research will your knowledge user group consider important and relevant? Step 7 on the right is looking at your KT goals. Goals, or the reason for sharing your information. So an effective KT plan requires clear KT goals tailored for each knowledge user group. And to establish your KT goals, you want to ask yourself, what are we trying to accomplish by sharing these results? For example, is your intent to share research knowledge? Perhaps you're sharing knowledge to inform future research and help others build upon what you've learned. In some cases, your results may be actionable with potentials to affect behavior, practice, or policy change. Looking at step 8 is the KT strategies. So you want to now consider some strategies that you will use to share these messages. And just note that these are not written in stone. There's a lot of really great examples of Aboriginal strategies, such as talking circles, that are in the website I mentioned before as well, if you're interested in learning more about Aboriginal type of strategies. And so a KT plan needs to explain how you will reach the appropriate set of knowledge users. And so there's numerous strategies you can do so. And so an example would be a publication. So perhaps other researchers do read publications and they find it really, really useful. And so if that's important for you, then that's great and you should continue with that. Sometimes there's other ways that it can be more beneficial, maybe sharing research knowledge through a virtual format, maybe using social media to get to the public will be helpful for you, maybe presenting at a conference, maybe raising awareness through a mass media campaign. There's many different options out there. And so this is just considering what options might work best for you. And when completing the step, be mindful that KT strategies appear to be more effective, multiple KT strategies appear to be more effective than single. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're doing a social media post, and so that might be one strategy, but within that social media post, you're also putting a link to a website to find more information. So that's 2, including an external website. And then also maybe you're including an infographic on some of the results. And that's a 3rd strategy. And so the evidence does show that layering, they call it, the KT strategies is best if it's possible. You also want to think about how your knowledge users prefer to receive information. So do your knowledge users go to the web for information, or do they prefer a more face-to-face or personal contact? And so this might require even getting into a little bit of research or talking to your partners who engage with your knowledge users a lot. Maybe you've had your own experience with the knowledge users you're looking at. Maybe considering different generations and where they usually go for their information. You also want to think about any barriers to accessing the information. So for example, if you're targeting a rural population, they might not have access to the internet, or it might be really slow, and that might be something you want to consider. Step 9 is looking at your KT process, and we've touched on this a little bit, but you want to plan for your intended process. And so at this stage, you can specify when KT will actually occur. Is it going to involve that integrated KT with researchers and knowledge users collaborating to shape the process? Or will your project involve end of grant KT, we call it, with a focus on sharing knowledge at the completion of the research process? It could be a bit of both as well. So you just want to think about that throughout the process. Step 10, which I have found in my experience often gets overlooked, but is a really, really key factor into your KT planning process and improving your KT planning processes for the future, is looking at your KT evaluation. KT planning it's not a linear process, it is iterative. And so we do need to circle back and ask ourselves, did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Did my KT strategies achieve my KT goals? And so step 10 invites you to capture the intended impacts of your KT activities and explore how you'll evaluate them in a way that is feasible given your time and your resources, which is really key. Always identify what is feasible for our project team. It's really great to go over and above, but sometimes it's just not feasible. So really consider that as well. So the reason we're looking at this is because knowing whether your KT plan was successful in achieving your KT goals, it's really important, and it helps you understand the value of your investment. And it can also help you capture the impact of your work. KT evaluation, it can also help refine strategies for the future. So if you're finding through evaluation that you did a conference, but maybe none of your researchers in the conference received a follow-up from like policymakers, for example, or other researchers on saying they were interested in learning more. And so the conference just showed that maybe there was information gained, but there wasn't anything, like there wasn't an outcome from it. And your outcome was that you wanted to have follow-ups maybe, and so that people collaborate and network more. And so if that's the case, you might want to go back and reevaluate what KT processes you might do moving forward or for your next process. Step 11, which we've talked about the whole time, is looking at your resources, and step 12 as well, looking at your budget items. So you want to assess the resources required to make your KT plan a reality, from financial to staffing to expertise. And as well, you want to think through all the potential budget items associated with your potential KT activities. And again, we want to be realistic here to make sure that this is possible. And then finally, step 13 just asks you to go over how you'll actually execute your KT strategies. So adding in some additional notes about timelines, maybe, essentially the procedures you will follow to bring these strategies to life. And so let's say, for example, you're opting to use webinars as a strategy. You want to consider how you'll use technology, how your webinars will be advertised, to whom, maybe describe the goal, the purpose of the webinars, et cetera, et cetera. the more detailed, just the more clear it will be for your project team and executing your KT plan. Before I go into the game, I just also want to note that KT planning is best done as a team, and that this template can be used as a discussion guide and a map when you get together with your team. And the reason it's better with a team is there's just more brainstorming involved. Some people might think of knowledge users that you didn't think of maybe, and so it is best done as a team if possible. And so now let's play a game. And so I want you to close your eyes and imagine this scenario. So you're in a strange new city, your phone has died, no one speaks the same language as you have no idea how to get back to your hotel, and all you want to do is get back to your hotel so that you can get tucked in for the night. But you run into someone who hands you a document to help you get back home. But again, they don't know English, so they hand you this document and it's supposed to help you get back home. And it's this quote unquote evidence-based document. So while imagining this scenario, I want you to think about this on two levels, sorry. An intellectual level, how does this evidence-based document help you? What information does it give you? What information does it not give you? Maybe how is it helpful or not helpful on a practical level? And also think about it on an emotional level. How are you feeling when you look at this document? And so here's the document. And so how are we feeling? How does this document make you feel? Do we even know what this document is? And we can type in the chat box. Great, so it is a subway map. That's the one piece of English we have on here. This is written in a different language, so perhaps you know the other language, which would be really helpful for you. But let's say we don't know the other language and we can't read this other than it says subway map. I saw that someone's saying that it's overwhelming and it's a lot of information. Some people are angry and frustrated. Is this useful to you, or is it not useful to you when you're trying to get back home tonight? Yeah, so this might be quite overwhelming to some people. We might be able to gather through using like a color coding how to get home, but it's a lot of information. We're not really sure what to use of it. We're also already just a lot of blood is pumping through us, a lot of adrenaline, and we don't know what to do with this. And so imagine you're reading a research paper and you're having trouble finding the right information you need. Maybe the research paper is 14 pages long and you're trying to find this one specific piece of information, but you don't know where to go. Now, I know I'm not comparing apples to apples here, but I think you get the same point. And that if you're not targeting your knowledge user and thinking about their needs and how they best receive and understand information, the more difficult it will be for them to figure out where to go for information, how to access the information, and how to make use out of the information. And so when you're developing your KT plans and going through your strategies, you can come back to this exercise that we did today and just think about mindful dissemination or KT planning. We don't just want to do any strategy in KT. We don't just want to toss out any, we just pick a couple, throw a dart dissemination strategy. We want to think about our knowledge users and how they best receive information. And you might not know, it might require talking to your knowledge users, and that's okay. That's again why it's really important to involve them in this process. Or you might go back to some research that points you in the right direction. So again, your product should be relevant and audience specific, thinking about their preferences and maybe previous knowledge and maybe their education level as well. Now I want to get into just a couple of examples of some really good KT strategies. And so the first that you can click on the description box is a video that Dr. Roberta Woodgate that she did, and she studied youth living with anxiety and created a series of videos representing dance interpretations of some of their studies themes. And so this is a type of arts-based KT, we call it, and that's just because they're going through a lot of dance movements, and it's just a different way of expressing and relaying the information from the research study. And so I really highly recommend watching that video. Another example here is here in our province with the government of New Brunswick. And so this is what we call the layering technique. And so they tweeted out New Brunswick COVID-19 vaccination rates. They did a little blurb there. So 17 people hospitalized, 9 in the ICU. But then they also included that infographic that shows you a nice visual representation of our vaccine rates. And they also included a link to a dashboard on vaccination rates and more information about COVID-19. And so these are just a couple of really good examples. And we won't go over them, but what I want you to think about is who are the knowledge users for each of these examples. So maybe you might be thinking for the government of New Brunswick example, it might be the public and they're trying to share information to the public, for example, but also think about it for the video when you go through it. Also think about what could be the main messages here. What are the points they're trying to get across? And finally, I just wanted to touch on a couple of resources. And so again, I've gone through the knowledge translation template with the Hospital of Sick Children. They have a suite of resources and some trainings that you can attend if you're interested in as well. So just go onto their website. If you're interested in looking at a couple of other tools, the Public Health Agency of Canada has a KT planner as well. The Canadian Institute of Health Research has a really good blurb on KT that I've already mentioned too. And then the Michael Smith Foundation has a webinar series that are pre-recorded. They're really good. They get into a lot of in-depth specific KT examples and maybe some challenges in KT, so I highly recommend that. And finally, there is a community of practice in Canada, and if you just pop that into Google, the Canadian Knowledge Transfer and Exchange Community of Practice, you can sign up for free as well. And then at NB-IRDT, we have a Data New Brunswick newsletter, a YouTube channel, a LinkedIn account, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as a means for sharing easy to understand and digestible information on what's going on here at NB-IRDT and the exciting research across the province as well. If you're interested in partnering with us to develop or broaden your KT strategies, currently we are primarily focusing on the Healthy Seniors Pilot Project. If you're interested in learning more, you can Google that as well, or you can email me at april.english@unb.ca. So we are highly focused on that right now, but if you are interested in partnering with us, maybe you want us to go over your KT plan maybe, or you just want some assistance with it, or maybe you're looking for a speaker at your next presentation, just give us an email and we can chat about that. For now, we are offering a KT workshop in the new year, like I said, February 2022, and more information will be sent out about that soon. I just want to thank everyone again for coming today. I hope you learned something new, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me. I love connecting and networking. Thank you.